That's not me, that's another Arvind.
Is it Arvind Sahay?
So while we wait for the slides to come, I'm a professor of marketing at the Indian Institute of Management, Ahmedabad. Been there for now 9 years. I taught for 8 years before that at London Business School. And what I'm going to be talking about is neuroscience and consumer behavior, customer behavior, and some implications for marketing. So my talk is not that directly related to India per se, but there are a lot of marketing related implications. And since we're talking about ideas, I'm going into the basis of how we get those ideas, how we process those ideas in the brain, and so on. How many people here are marketing related or have some? Interesting. So at least some people in the audience will have some connect. There we go. So, well, I guess it's still 3 minutes to 12 in my watch, so good morning. That's what I want to talk about today, neuroscience and customer behavior. Why do we want to talk about this? For a very long time in marketing, what we have essentially done is stimulus and response. You take some action and you observe the behavior of the customer. Sometimes it works, sometimes it does not. And we do not know enough about what leads to the responses of customers. And to know that, we need to understand what's going on inside our brains, because if you are giving a stimulus and you're getting a response, then the brain is working to convert that stimulus to some kind of a response. And this new emerging field of neuroscience, it's about 10 years old, has now a fair amount of insight which is helping us in a variety of fields, not just in medical science, but in economics, behavioral finance, behavioral marketing, neuroeconomics, and so on. So a lot of different subfields are getting created around this. In fact, one could argue that neuroscience will pretty soon impact almost everything, including the leadership issues that we've been talking about in the morning. So what I want to cover today morning is a few things on neuroscience and customer behavior. When we look at neuroscience, it's important to at least have a basic idea of our brain, what it looks like. So what I'll do is I'll begin with a very brief overview of the structure of the brain and how it works. Please bear with me while I go through that. The next thing that I will do is I'm going to focus on a narrow part of the application of neuroscience, which is on brands. So we will look at some of the impact of how neuroscience works so far as the brain is concerned in connection with brands. And then I will look at two examples or ways of thinking about applying this in the context of branding and marketing. One will be how things get into our memory and how we remember things and what impact that has on branding. And the second is the role of others, what we otherwise called word of mouth, how that works in practice. And I will conclude with one example of some research that we did about a year ago. So let's start with the brain. What is the brain? That's our brain as it looks as a thin slice side on. You can think of it in three parts. The top part, the brown part, is what makes us human. That's the cerebral cortex. The part in the middle, that egg-shaped yellow part, and the purple-shaped U thingy over there, and this slightly yellow arc like a boomerang, those are what we call the midbrain. And the purple line leading down is the hindbrain. Another way to think about it is that the hindbrain is the reptilian brain. It's what lizards and reptiles have. The midbrain is what some higher order animals have. And it's only mammals who have got this cerebral cortex. And the human brain, of course, has the largest part of the largest size of the cerebral cortex. Now, each one of these has different functions. And I don't want to spend too much time on going into the details of the structure of the brain. But what makes us human is essentially the cerebral cortex part, which allows us to go beyond reflexive action, to think about our reflexes, to analyze and to stop instinctive reflexes. That's the cerebral cortex that we have. The other part that I would like us to keep in mind as we go along is that despite that massive cerebral cortex, which is supposed to make us into reasoning creatures, actually the impact of emotions, of reflexes, has still not gone away. If you look at that brain, right in the center, there is a small red almond-shaped dot. That's called the amygdala. It's supposedly the center for our emotions. And that influences our behavior, our thinking quite a lot, and we'll look at how that happens as we go along. A little more detail is over here. Oops. So the occipital lobe, which we will look at, is where our sight resides. Now please remember that about 70 to 80% of stimuli, inputs coming into our brains, is through our eyes. This particular slant that you see is actually showing the occipital lobe as a small lobe. It's actually one of the larger lobes. You have the frontal lobe, which is more about reasoning, the parietal lobe for hearing, the temporal lobe for other things. The brainstem is part of the hindbrain. Now, here's the thing that for us we should keep in mind. I said that we are not always able to use our reasoning power all the time. Why does that happen? Because that thing in the middle that you see, the U-shaped structure, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the thalamus, and so on, which are also called the midbrain or the limbic system or the mesobrain, these together constitute memory and emotions, and they always influence our reasoning also. So for example, I will ask you, why did you buy this car? And you will tell me that this car gives me 20 kilometers per liter. It runs on diesel. It's a good brand. It has a reliable service network. And it has a good resale value. That's the reasoning part of the brain coming up with a response, a rational response to the question of why you bought the car. The reality may be that somewhere in your emotional brain, the limbic system, you like the car because it is an SUV, it makes you feel good, you like the shape. And that was what drove you to buy it, and then you rationalized the purchase of the car by saying it has good fuel efficiency, it has good service network, it is reliable, and so on. Scientists today tell us that about 60 to 70% of our decisions are based on this particular process, where the decisions are actually taking place in the emotional part of our brain, and then we are rationalizing in the cerebral cortex, in the rational part of our brain. Let's keep that in mind, because what we are essentially now saying is connected very closely to the idea of branding, which is what we want to lead up to. That a lot of what we do is not rational, it is not irrational either. Yes, there is this very false division which has been created that somebody is rational or somebody is not rational or emotional. It's nothing like that. All human beings combine the two when they take decisions. And there is a reason why that happens. So essentially now, in this brain, when we take in inputs, because when we're talking about branding, some inputs have to come in, the brain works on two pathways. The first is what we call pathway 1. I have borrowed liberally from Daniel Kahneman's terminology. Pathway 1 is the fast response, the instinctive response, the emotional response. Every piece of input that comes in, a little part of that input goes directly to your amygdala, that little almond-shaped dot in the center of your brain. It goes directly over there, and you will start reacting to that input even before you are consciously aware of it. But it's only a small part of the input. Most of the input will go into the designated area. So a visual input will go into the occipital lobe, an auditory input is going into the parietal lobe, and so on. And then, once that happens, yes, so your visual input is going to the rear of your brain, the occipital input. And here you are seeing, you begin to see. But as you begin to see consciously, remember the occipital lobe is seeing it consciously, the amygdala is already reacting. You see a snake, you are already reacting even without knowing why you are reacting. And then slowly what happens is it goes to the rest of the brain, and the rest of your brain, conscious brain, will say, perhaps, that's not a snake, it's just something that looks like a snake, and then you're able to override the instinctive response. So in a sense, this is how our brain works for everything. Inputs come into the thalamus, or the relevant part of the brain. A little part of it will go into the amygdala, and that's the red line that you see. And the remaining part goes into the cortex, whichever relevant part it is, the cerebral cortex, the occipital lobe, the parietal lobe, and so on. The red arrow points to the instinctive emotional reaction which is already happening to you even before you are aware of the reaction. The green lines refer to the more conscious part that we are thinking about and reacting to as we go along, and sometimes along that green path and the red arrow and the blue arrow on top, that will override the emotional response. But many times it will not be able to override the emotional response, the limbic response as we call it. So with that as the backdrop, now you can make a decision with the knowledge of what it is and how you feel about it. The amygdala is giving you the feeling part of it. The parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, is giving you the knowledge. Should I pay attention to this stimuli? Should I be listening to it? Should I not be listening to it? Should I be doing something about it? And of course, as soon as we do that, whatever we see or hear is not always completely new. I might have some memories, some experiences. And this is where we now go into the branding part, because branding is essentially about putting stuff in people's memories through these two pathways. I want to put my brand into your memory using these two pathways in the brain. So how do customers think about brands? Going back to our basic framework, the brain is in the middle, and we want to understand what's going on in the brain. So the first thing that I want to share with you over here is that now there is physiological evidence which says that our brains change in the face of a liked brand, a favorite brand. So the VMPFC is the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the DLPFC is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. Let's not get into the details of that. The important thing is that the VMPFC is a center for affect, for emotion, for feelings. It's connected to the amygdala. The dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is the portion of our brain which is much more analytical. And now there are studies which tell us that in the face of a favorite brand, the VMPFC, a place which is a center for affect, is actually becoming more activated. Equally importantly, the DLPFC, where we do analysis, reasoning, so-called rational thinking, that is becoming deactivated, which means I'm less able to compare this brand with other brands because I can no longer think that rationally. Please remember that you're not even aware of this. It is happening without your volition, because that favorite brand is in front of you. It is happening without your volition. And that is why getting a powerful brand is such a powerful thing. There are physiological changes in the brain, which means that if your brand has become a powerful brand, as a strong brand, as a liked brand, as a favorite brand, you actually have a loyal customer now, because that fellow is going to be looking at it as a favorite brand for physiological reasons, not for no reasons. A little bit of other technical detail, there are something called von Economo neurons, which also help in this process. These neurons are connected to our limbic centers. These are much longer axons, and they help us to maintain the memories, form the memories, react to the memories. And the idea of a strong brand is essentially that I'm able to capture both pathways, pathway 1 and pathway 2, so that both the affect and the intuition are developed, and whenever I'm faced with a new stimuli regarding the brand, then I'm able to react in the way that I'm supposed to as a buyer. So let me look at two applications in terms of familiarity and the role of others. There's a very famous saying in English that familiarity breeds contempt. Actually, the reverse is true. The more familiar you are with something, the more you like it. Basically, if something is repeated to you again and again, you see it again and again, you like it. And this is a trick that marketers use a lot. The other thing is, in terms of learning, is what happens. I said that to get my purpose as a brand manager is to get my brand into your memory. So let's spend a couple of minutes looking at memory. What are our memories like? How do we form our memories? So, 20 years ago was graduation day, parents were there. I was a gold medalist, and that day was a special day. I remember each thing very clearly. There was a poster of Coca-Cola up there. That's an episodic memory. It is related to an event in my life. There might be some semantic memories. Something which has meaning to me. The birth of a child is meaningful. It makes me feel good. There are some procedural memories. In India, we have many procedural memories. What do we do when we celebrate festivals or happy occasions? We have sweets. That's a procedural memory. Yes? We are the country which buys the highest per capita consumption of sweets because that is what we have grown up with. It's processed. It's kind of procedural. We do it automatically. It's in the limbic system. There is primed memory. Just like Pavlov's dog, you ring a bell and the dog starts salivating. That's also a kind of memory. So you have many different kinds of memories. Where is that slide gone? It's not coming up over there. So those are the different kinds of memories. And the idea is, of course, that I want to get there. So how do I get there? One is repetition, make it familiar. The other is what we call an emotionally charged stimulus. What is an emotionally charged stimulus? Something which I can associate with, which makes me feel good. The brain wants to feel good, essentially. And the neurotransmitter inside the brain which helps you to feel good is dopamine. Interestingly, dopamine is also the neurotransmitter which comes when you snort cocaine. Right? It also gives a spike of dopamine in the brain. So whatever is the stimulus, whether it is food, drink, pleasant aromas, beautiful objects, learning to trust a stranger, humor, whatever it is, they constitute emotionally charged stimuli. Whenever there is an emotionally charged stimuli, then you will remember. It will become part of some memory that you have. And you need to build, to get your brand into the memory of the customer, you need to build along one of these memories, episodic memory or semantic memory or procedural memory or priming memory. Let's take an example. This is not an advocacy for any brand, and I have never worked for this company, and I'm unlikely to, but if you take Cadbury's, what is Cadbury's doing with its campaign, Kuch Meetha Ho Jaye? It is essentially trying to change our procedural memory, right? From saying ki we are going to have mithai, we are going to start saying we are going to have Cadbury's in a few years' time if they continue with this. So that's the power of getting your brand into a particular kind of a memory. And the key over here, of course, is that we can help in memory reconstruction. This is the second part which marketers take advantage of, so we should be careful when we look at these marketing messages. Our memories are not all accurate. When we recall something, we recall only 70% accurately. The remaining 30% we construct from our present reality. So I'm speaking here in front of you, and if I'm asked to recall something from 20 days ago, I will not recall everything that I did when I was at a board meeting of a particular company, but I will recall about 60–70% of it, and the remaining part I will construct from my present surroundings. And again, this is something that marketers use reasonably well to reconstruct memories. I think the most powerful ones that are Marlboro and Amul, which reconstruct memories for us again and again, keeping the brand contemporary, or the red color red. Marlboro can no longer advertise, but every time people see the color red, that particular shade, palette of red, a Marlboro smoker feels an urge to smoke. So that's how powerful a good brand gets into the particular kind of memory is. The other thing, of course, is the role of others, word of mouth. How do we get word of mouth going? Very good example is this Har Ek Friend Zaruri Hai Yaar. Where is it? So here again, without going into the technical details, we actually have some parts of our brain which are dedicated to empathizing. So I'm waving my hand like this, and somewhere in your brain, some neurons are firing, which would have fired if you had been waving your hand. Yes, that's the basis of empathy. That's the basis of being able to sympathize. And therefore, taking these two things, and there are many other things that we can talk about, but just taking these two things, getting into the memory and role of others, that's how we want to construct. And then when we take a decision, there's always a bit of a risk. Should I buy Cadbury's or should I buy Mars? Should I buy a Honda Civic or should I buy a Toyota Corolla? There's always a bit of risk. And the one that our brains will go to buy is the one which minimizes this particular risk, which increases the dopamine kick. And now we can measure what kind of messaging or what kind of stimuli is more likely to lead to that higher level of dopamine kick, which is going to increase the probability that somebody is going to buy a particular product or a particular brand or not. We did a little, I'm kind of running out of time, so I'll wind up now very quickly. We did some research about a year and a half, 2 years ago, where we used RFI resonance field imaging to essentially find out how men and women think about brands, how they relate to brands. So we picked people at 4 ages, 18, 20, 25, 30, 35, and we asked them to come in and with their brain in a base state, we did the RFI, the imaging of their brain. And then we talked to them about their favorite brand for about 35, 40 minutes. And then we did a re-imaging of their brain. And what we learned was that, sorry, this one is again not coming up. What we learned was that at 18, from the respondent set, females related to brands at an affect level which was much higher than that of the males. Males related to brands on a cognitive level, which was much higher than that of females at the age of 18. But by the time we got to the 35-year-old set, the difference is starting to narrow. So that clearly has some very direct marketing implications in what you want to do. So to summarize, what are we saying? If you use these kind of approaches, you can be a much more powerful marketer. Your design and implementation of marketing activities can be a lot more granular, a lot more targeted to be able to achieve your goals. And ultimately, the goal is to get my brand into the amygdala, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. If I'm there, then I'm set as a brand for a very, very long time. Because once the brand gets into the emotional part of the brain, you are kind of at an advantage compared to every other brand. Thank you.